It started with a whisper that should not have worked. A woman, 86 years old, 5 feet tall, 3 bags of groceries at her feet in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly on Clement Street in Dumas, Arkansas, leaning toward a man she had never met. A man with a jaw like a fence post and a vest that said things most people crossed streets to avoid reading. A man who had stopped next to her in the parking lot for no reason that had anything to do with her, who was not looking at her, who was simply loading groceries into his saddlebag and minding the business of a Tuesday afternoon. She reached up and touched his arm. He turned. She looked at the group of young men 30 feet away, 3 of them watching her from the corner where Clement Street met the parking lot entrance. The specific watching of people who had been watching her for 2 weeks and who had decided that the watching was a form of ownership. And she turned back to the man with the vest and she said, barely above a whisper, the 6 words that would change both of their Tuesdays and a great many Tuesdays after. Act like you know me. He went still. He looked at her face. He looked at the corner. He looked back at her face, which was doing the careful thing that faces do when they are working to show nothing, and he understood, in the way that men who have known certain kinds of threat since they were young understand it on sight, exactly what he was looking at. She said it again, quieter this time, her hand still on his arm, steady. Act like you know me. He put his arm around her shoulders. What happened on Clement Street in the weeks that followed would bring 300 motorcycles to a block that had never seen one, for a woman that almost none of them had ever met. And it all started with an 86-year-old woman who decided, in the parking lot of a Piggly Wiggly on a Tuesday in October, to trust a stranger with the 6 most important words she had said in years. Dumas was a small city in the Arkansas Delta, the kind of place that sat at the intersection of the agricultural past and the agricultural present, where the main street had been rebuilt twice in 50 years, and the grain elevator at the edge of town was the tallest structure for 6 miles in any direction. It was not a place that appeared in many news stories. It was the kind of place that appeared in people's memories, the place they grew up, the place they drove through on the way to somewhere else, the place that was smaller than they remembered when they came back for a funeral and larger in every way that mattered. Clement Street ran 4 blocks north from the Piggly Wiggly toward the old mill district, which had not been a mill district since 1987, but retained the name the way neighborhoods retain the names of the things that made them. The houses on Clement Street were the houses of people who had been on Clement Street for a long time, small, most of them, with deep front porches and yards that showed the specific investment of people who intended to stay. Crepe myrtles, azalea beds, a rose garden here and there, kept up despite the Arkansas summer, which did not make rose gardens easy. The smell of October in the Delta was the smell of cut fields and wood smoke from somewhere down the road and the faint residual sweetness of cotton gin season, which had ended the week before and left its perfume in the air the way seasons do when they are finishing. The light in the afternoons was low and gold, and made the porches look like something from a photograph that had been taken with intention. This was the kind of street that had known its neighbors for decades, that had known whose car was whose by engine sound alone, whose porch light was on at what hour. The kind of street that had been, for most of its history, the kind of street where nothing particularly bad happened because everyone on it knew everyone else, and the knowing was its own form of protection. That had begun to change in the spring. Remy Duchamp had been riding since he was 17, which was 31 years ago, and he had the kind of face that had organized itself around a life, spent mostly outdoors and occasionally in situations that required his full attention. He was 48, broad across the back, with patches on his vest that announced things about him and a specific register. Steel Country MC, Arkansas. He had ridden into Dumas the way he rode into most places, without announcing himself, on his way somewhere, stopping for the ordinary reasons that stopping required. Gas, groceries, 15 minutes off the road. He had been at the Piggly Wiggly for 12 minutes. He had not planned to be there for longer. He had one bag of groceries in his left hand and was working the saddlebag latch with his right when the small hand touched his forearm, and the world changed in the way it changes when something that matters arrives without warning. He was carrying something privately that the Tuesday had not yet asked of him. A month earlier, his mother had been moved to assisted living in Little Rock, and the house she had lived in for 40 years had been sitting empty since, and Remy had been in the specific suspended condition of a man who knows something has ended and has not yet found what to do with the ending. He had been riding more, staying longer on roads that had no particular destination, sitting in parking lots of Piggly Wiggly stores, loading one bag of groceries, minding the afternoon, then the hand, then the 6 words, then the corner. Before we get to who that woman was, and you need to know her, because she is why 300 men rode into Dumas on a Saturday in November, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. Wherever you are tonight, I read every single one. Now, back to Clement Street. Back to Tuesday, because the woman who whispered those 6 words was carrying something that had been pressing on her for months. And what she had decided to do about it was going to take a stranger's arm and 300 motorcycles and a Saturday morning that the people at that corner were never going to forget. Her name was Agnes Pearl Whitmore, and she had lived at 214 Clement Street in Dumas, Arkansas for 63 years. 63 years. She had been 23 when she and her husband Robert moved in, the spring after they married, into a house that needed paint and a new kitchen floor, and which they had painted and refloored, and which she had lived in every day since, which meant she had lived in that house through the Kennedy administration and every administration after it, through Robert's career at the mill and his retirement and his death 11 years ago, through the births of 4 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, through the crepe myrtles she had planted in 1974 that were now taller than the porch roof and that bloomed every summer in the specific pink that she had chosen from a catalog and that Robert had said was too much, and that she had planted anyway because she was right about the color. She was 86 years old. She was 4'11" and weighed perhaps 102 pounds on the days when she had eaten well, and she had a face that had been organized by 86 years into something that carried its history openly. The lines around her eyes from the specific squint of a woman who had spent decades reading fine print and looking at things she wanted to see clearly. The set of her mouth that held both what she had survived and what she had chosen not to let it take from her. She had a habit. Her daughter in Memphis called it her greatest virtue. Her grandson in Fayetteville called it her superpower, and the congregation at First Baptist on 3rd Street, where she had attended for 51 years, simply called it Agnes, of writing letters, not emails. Letters, on the specific cream-colored stationery she had ordered from the same catalog since 1989, with a pen she refilled rather than replaced, and the cursive she had learned in the 3rd grade and practiced every week since. She wrote to her grandchildren. She wrote to her great-grandchildren. She wrote to the members of First Baptist who were sick or grieving. She wrote to her congressman twice a year, in the cursive, about things she believed he should know. She had survived 3 serious illnesses. A flood in 1983 that took the back half of her garden, Robert's death, and the specific indignities of a body that at 86 required certain accommodations that 23-year-old Agnes would have found inconceivable. She had survived all of it with the specific combination of stubbornness and grace that is not taught, but is grown over decades, by a person who has decided that the world's difficulty is not an argument for giving up, but for staying. What she had not survived easily, what had been pressing on her since the spring, were the young men at the corner of Clement and the parking lot entrance. There were 4 of them, rotating 3 or 4 at a time, operating from the corner and the alley alongside the building across the street. They were not from Clement Street. They were not from anywhere on Clement Street. They had arrived the way these things arrive, gradually, without announcement, establishing presence through repetition and the specific grammar of territoriality. They had begun using the corner in March, and by May, they had established it the way people establish a place when no one challenges the establishment. And by October, they had been there long enough that their absence would have been notable. They had not done anything specific to Agnes, nothing that could be named to an officer in a way that produced a report number and a follow-up. They watched. They called out things when she walked past with her groceries. 2 weeks ago, one of them had followed her to her car, not touching her, not threatening her directly, just walking behind her the way someone walks when they want you to know they are there. She had gotten into her car without turning around. She had driven home. She had sat in her driveway for 4 minutes before she went inside. She had not told her daughter. She had not called the police again. The first call, in May, had produced a patrol car and a conversation and nothing else, because what she had described was not yet enough. She had prayed about it. She had sat in her kitchen with her morning coffee and her stationery, and she had thought about it. And she had decided, with the specific deliberateness of a woman who has been making decisions for 86 years, that she was not going to become someone who did not walk to her own grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon in October in the town where she had lived for 63 years. She had driven to the Piggly Wiggly. She had gotten her 3 bags of groceries. She had come out to the parking lot and seen the man loading his saddlebag, and seen the specific character of him. Not the patches, not the size, not the things most people saw first, but the way he moved, the quality of attention he had in a parking lot, the look of someone who did not perform his presence because it did not need performing. She had made a decision. She had touched his arm. Remy Duchamp put his arm around her shoulders. He was not performing this either. He turned toward her the way he turned toward things he had decided to attend to, fully, without the portion of himself held in reserve. And he put his arm around her, and they walked to her car the way 2 people walk when one of them has known the other for years. He carried 2 of her 3 bags. He did not look at the corner directly. He looked at it the way he looked at most potential problems, peripherally, continuously, with enough attention to map it completely, without ever making the mapping visible. He loaded her groceries into the trunk. He said, "How long?" She told him. Not everything, the shape of it, the duration, the specific incident 2 weeks ago with the man following her to the car. She told him the way she told important things, plainly, without drama, with the cursive trained precision of a woman who understood that clarity was a form of respect for the person you were speaking to. He listened. He asked 2 questions. He asked what her address was. She told him. He looked at the corner one more time. "I'm going to follow you home," he said. "And then I'm going to make a call." She looked at him. She was not afraid of him. She had not been afraid of him from the moment she decided to touch his arm, because the decision had required her to assess him first, and she had assessed him correctly. "What kind of call?" she said. "The kind that handles things," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. "All right," she said. He followed her home in the specific way of someone who knows what following home means in this context, not behind her, slightly offset, visible to anyone watching from the corner and visible to Agnes in her rearview mirror, the Harley's headlight a steady presence on Clement Street, until she pulled into 214, and he pulled to the curb. He sat at the curb while she carried her groceries inside. He made his call from the curb, the phone at his ear, his eyes on the corner 2 blocks south, where 2 of the young men had watched him follow her down the street and had gone back to their conversation. The call lasted 9 minutes. What Remy Duchamp had described in 9 minutes traveled further and faster than 9 minutes usually travels. He had described an 86-year-old woman on a street she had lived on for 63 years, in a house she had built a life in, being made afraid on a Tuesday in October to walk to her own grocery store. He had described it plainly and without embellishment, the way he had been trained by 27 years of being trusted with things that mattered to describe them. He had given the address and the corner and the duration of it, and the specific incident 2 weeks ago. The man he had called was named Terrence Gibbs, his chapter president, who was in McGehee when the call came, and who had listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and who had said, "When Remy finished, I'll handle the rest. You stay on that street." Remy said, yes. He stayed on the street. Agnes came to the front window twice in the next hour. The second time she brought 2 cups of coffee and came to the door and held one out, and he came up the porch steps and took it and sat in the porch chair she gestured to, and they talked while he watched Clement Street, and the street watched back. She told him about the crepe myrtles. She told him Robert had called the pink too much. She told him Robert had been wrong, which was not something she said about Robert often, but this was one of the cases where the record needed to reflect the facts. Remy looked at the crepe myrtles. He was wrong, he said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. He was. They drank their coffee. 3 of the young men had reappeared at the corner. They were watching 214 with the attention of people recalibrating a situation they had thought they understood, and now understood less. The recalibration was going to continue. The night passed, without incident. Remy was on Clement Street until 11, when a chapter brother arrived to relieve him. The relief was named Isaiah Croft, who sat in the same porch chair from 11 to 4 in the morning, and who was replaced at 4 by a man named Devin Sellers, who brought a thermos of coffee from the all-night diner on Route 65. Agnes came to her door at 6:15 and saw Devin on the porch. She brought him eggs and toast, which he ate in the porch chair. She asked him if he had been there all night. He said someone had been there all night. She did not say anything for a moment. She said, "Tell whoever it was I said thank you." Devin said he would. The young men at the corner arrived at 9 and found the corner already occupied by a man in a vest who was sitting on a milk crate reading a novel with his back against the building, and who did not look up when they arrived, and who did not leave when they stood near him, and who was simply there. In the way that facts are simply there, in a way that did not invite argument, because it was not making an argument. It was making a statement, and the statement was, "This corner is occupied." They left. They came back. The corner was still occupied. They left again. This went on for 3 days. The Saturday morning came the way October Saturdays come in the Arkansas Delta, cool and bright, the sky the specific clean blue that follows a cold front and makes everything look deliberate, as if the light has been arranged. The crepe myrtles on Agnes Whitmore's front lawn had gone to their fall color. The leaves rust red against the deep pink of the late blooms, and the porch was clear, and the steps were swept, as they were every Saturday, because Agnes swept her steps on Saturday mornings as she had swept them every Saturday morning for 51 years. She was standing on the porch with her coffee when the sound started, from the south end of Clement Street. Low at first, then building, the specific resonance of V-twin engines in number, not one, not a few, but the kind of number that has its own weather, its own pressure, the kind of sound that reaches you before you can see its source and tells you something large is happening. Agnes set her coffee cup on the porch railing. She watched. They came around the corner of Clement and 3rd in a column that did not end quickly. Bikes 2 abreast, headlights on in the morning sun, the chrome catching the October light in the specific way of things that are very clean and very intentional. They came slowly, the way columns come when they are not in a hurry. When arrival is the point, an arrival can take as long as it takes. They filled Clement Street from 3rd to the parking lot at the Piggly Wiggly end. Both curbs, the center of the street, lined up with the specific order of a formation that had arranged itself without needing to be arranged, because this was not the first time these men had done something like this, and the doing of it was built into how they moved. 307 motorcycles. The engines cut, one by one and then in clusters, until the silence came down on Clement Street like something physical, the specific silence of a very large organized thing that has arrived and stopped and is simply present. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind that the people at the corner of Clement and the parking lot entrance, who had appeared at their usual time and found themselves inside a silence they had not expected and could not exit without walking through 307 motorcycles, understood was not temporary. Remy Duchamp came up the porch steps. He stood in front of Agnes Whitmore, who was standing at the top of her porch steps with her coffee cup in both hands, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly on Tuesday, directly, completely, with no portion of himself elsewhere. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. She looked at the street. At 307 motorcycles and 307 men in October sunlight on the street she had lived on for 63 years. She looked at the corner, where the young men were very still in the specific way of people who have completed a calculation and are waiting to see if additional information changes it. It did not change it. They were going to leave. They understood this. They understood it the way you understand things that are facts rather than opinions. Agnes looked at the crepe myrtles, the rust-red leaves, the late pink blooms. She looked at Remy. Her face did the thing it did when she was in the congregation at First Baptist, and the choir hit something that had been built toward for 32 bars, and finally arrived. A specific opening, a quality of receiving. The face of a woman who has spent a long life learning what it feels like when something is exactly right, and who recognizes it without hesitation when it comes. She did not cry in front of people she had not chosen. She looked at the street full of men who had come for her on a Saturday morning in October because a stranger had made a call, and she chose them all at once, the way she had chosen Robert in Clement Street, and the pink crepe myrtles and every other thing she had been right about in 86 years. Then she cried. Not quietly, not the contained kind. The kind that is the release of months, the specific undoing of a woman who had been carrying something alone for a long time and had set it down. Remy did not say anything. He stood on the porch next to her, and he let the moment be what it was. The street was silent. 307 men stood in the October light and did not move and did not speak, and the silence of them was the most eloquent thing on Clement Street that morning, and it was enough. The young men did not return to the corner. Not that Saturday, not the following week, not the week after. They relocated their presence to a different block, a different corner, a different address, and the specific grammar of their reappearance on Clement Street, the calculation that had made it seem safe to occupy that corner, had been permanently revised by a Saturday in October, and a street full of motorcycles that had filled the math differently than anything they had expected. Agnes Whitmore walked to the Piggly Wiggly on the following Tuesday without incident. She walked with her head level and her pace even, and the specific carriage of a woman who has reclaimed something and intends to keep it. She bought her groceries. She came home. The street was quiet. She swept her steps. Remy Duchamp passed through Dumas twice more that year and stopped on Clement Street both times, and both times Agnes came to the door and there was coffee and the porch chairs and the conversation of two people who have become, without planning to, people in each other's lives. He told her about his mother in Little Rock. She told him about Robert and the crepe myrtles. The full version. She told him about the letter she had written to her congressman the week after the Saturday, in the cursive, on the cream-colored stationery, describing in precise detail what had happened on Clement Street in the fall, and what had resolved it, and what she thought the congressman should understand about the intersection of age and visibility, and what it costs a person to feel unsafe on their own block. She had received a response, a form letter, as expected, and had written back. He laughed when she told him about the second letter. She looked at him with the expression she had looked at Robert with when he laughed at the wrong time, which Robert had always said was his favorite of her expressions. "It requires follow-up," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He thought about her for a long time after the second visit. He thought about 6 words in a parking lot, and what it had taken to say them, to reach up and touch the arm of a complete stranger, and ask him to be present in a way that made her look less alone. He thought about what that 6-word decision required of her, and about what it had required of him, and about how neither of those things had been particularly large in the moment of their asking, but had turned out to be exactly the size the situation needed. He thought about his mother's house, about what it would mean to drive out there and go inside and start deciding what the ending was going to look like, which was a thing that required presence, which was a thing he had been not doing by riding past it on other roads. He drove to Little Rock on a Thursday. He went inside. He stayed. Some people think that asking for help is the hard part, that the 6 words are the hardest 6 words, that the asking is what takes everything. But Agnes Pearl Whitmore had been standing in that parking lot for 86 years, not literally, but in every way that mattered. She had been standing in rooms and on streets and in pews and at kitchen tables, and she had learned, in all of those places, that the world does not always offer you what you need, and that sometimes you have to reach for it, even when reaching means extending your hand toward a stranger in a parking lot, and trusting that the stranger is the kind of person who understands what the reaching means. She reached. He was. And the 6 words she said, barely above a whisper, on a Tuesday in October, to a man she did not know, brought 307 motorcycles to her street on a Saturday morning, and gave her back the thing that had been taken from her, which was not safety exactly, and was not power exactly, but was the specific thing that 86 years earns you. The specific thing that no one on any corner has the right to take. The ability to walk to your own grocery store, on your own street, in your own town, without being afraid. If this story found you tonight, if you believe that 6 words said to the right stranger can change a street, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And drop a comment below. Have you ever trusted a stranger at exactly the right moment? Type "act like you know ME" in the comments if this one reached you all the way down. I read every single one.